Markets around the Asia Pacific yesterday pretty much behaving as this deal is now a fait accompli, but it's not, is it? There's still a few hurdles to clear.
Yeah, there are, Paul. I mean, granted, it was a massive step forward to get a handshake deal between President Biden and Speaker McCarthy in the first place. And that now has been turned into legislative text that was released on Sunday night here in Washington. But this is not game over yet, because lawmakers are, as we speak, likely returning to Washington to be back at the Capitol tomorrow. And on Tuesday, Eastern time at 3 p.m., the Rules Committee in the House will be considering this measure, setting potentially the rules under which it would come to the floor for a vote. But that could be a little bit tricky because several Republican members of that committee, including Congressman Chip Roy, Congressman Ralph Norman, and even potentially Tom Massey, could be a holdout, two of which have expressed publicly discontent with the deal. And they could actually hold up the putting of this package on the floor. It may need, if three Republicans hold out and don't vote to advance it, that a Democrat on the committee would need to get in line, which may prove tricky to do. I mean, even once it gets through rules, it still has to get a vote in both the House and the Senate. And we know that on both sides of the aisle, there are parts of the Democratic and Republican Party who are unsatisfied with the compromise that was reached here.
Yeah, Chip Roy, to your point, calling this deal, I believe, quote, insanity. So is there anything Kevin McCarthy can do on the GOP side to usher this through the Rules Committee?
Well, he might have to work hard to flex his muscles as Speaker. Granted, he may be riding a little bit of momentum in that he was able to get some concessions from the Biden administration in this deal in the first place. But it may prove challenging because he may need to expend some political capital to get it through the Rules Committee. And then he still needs to garner 218 votes in the House of Representatives to get it passed in that chamber. And we know that on the far right end of the party, members of the Freedom Caucus, for example, have taken issue with some of the parameters in this bill, the idea that the spending cuts are not cuts enough, not big enough to make those members satisfied, that defense spending isn't increasing by enough, that 3% figure on an increase in the defense budget not satisfying some lawmakers. So he's going to have to try to rally all these different parts of his party at the same time that on the Democratic side, the House Minority Leader, Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries may need to get some moderate Democrats on this too. But he has also not publicly expressed support for a deal at this time, because there's plenty in this package that Democrats are not happy with either.
Yeah, tell us a little more about that, because President Biden's been making calls himself to leaders to try and get this over the line. What sort of resistance is there on the Democrat side?
Yeah, President Biden has been making calls to members, he told reporters earlier today, and said he is feeling good. But we have to keep in mind that Democrats, up until recently, had been calling for a clean debt ceiling increase with no concessions, no negotiations. And clearly that isn't what happened in this compromise deal. Specifically, some of the issues that Democrats are taking real issue with is the idea of stricter work requirements for entitlements. It didn't apply to Medicare in this package, or Medicaid rather, but the SNAP food assistance program would see some tightening of that, which doesn't sit well with many members of the Progressive Caucus. There's also issue with some environmentalists about some of the energy provisions in this bill. So those are a few areas in which Democrats may be unsatisfied. Granted, it just kind of goes to show you that this is going to have to be a deal that ultimately makes it into law by passage at the middle. Moderates in both parties ultimately are likely what is going to get this thing over the finish line. In theory, a lot of work to be done still. And remember, we're a week out from the X date when Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has said the Treasury Department is going to run out of cash to pay the bills. June 5th is rapidly approaching.